Sometimes danger creeps into our homes. And sometimes it gets an invitation. For John Agerter, death came knocking. "63-year-old entrepreneur John Agerter is found dead, wrapped in a sleeping bag in his suburban garage.
His feet were tied up. He had duct tape around his face and around his neck. He had a cord wrapped around his neck, and they put plastic shopping bags over his head.
The terrible violence seems out of character with the quiet neighborhood and the shy and retiring man who lies murdered. John Agerter owns a thriving communications tower business, AirPage Corps in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. With the success of his company, Agerter builds a suburban home in Brookfield, just outside Milwaukee, in 1985, where he lives alone.
John had a great house. He built it himself, designed it, and oversaw the construction of it. There weren't a lot of people that John knew, I don't think, that he spent a lot of time with.
He doesn't really open up to anybody, you know. I was in his life for 4 years, and I don't know who else really was in his life.
He was very successful. He had started pagers back basically when they first got started years ago. From what I've heard, he basically drove everyone else out of competition.
He was a brilliant at understanding business. He really knew many, many things about all kinds of different fields.
John's passion for his business is all-consuming.
He did nothing that I know of for relaxation or entertainment outside of business.
I mean, the guy was 63 or something like that, and he climbed 500-foot towers. Like, and this is like not a challenge for him. He would work from 6 o'clock in the morning until it didn't matter. It really didn't matter to him. You'll know when he's your friend because he'll ask you to go have a sandwich. It's the funniest thing. He'll call you and say, "Do you want to go have a sandwich?" And that's how you knew John was your friend.
John's dedication to his business turns him into a bit of a recluse. When he's not at the office, he spends most of his time alone at home with his growing radio gadget collections.
His dining room had an office in it, and pretty much every other area of the house had stuff stacked in it that he would get. He collected anything that had to do with radios and transmitters, anything like that.
He had very strange collections. Just like normal day-to-day stuff for him it was not a normal thing. The only thing that was important to him was work.
For nearly a decade, the only other presence in his home is his elderly mother.
He lived with her until she passed. John was, I don't know if you want to call it eccentric, but different. I know he never really got along with his family because he was just an out there character. They kind of pushed him off to the side, and it didn't really matter to him. Family wasn't necessarily important to him. What was important is his work.
After the death of his mother, the empty rooms in the house become a dumping ground.
When his mother was alive, the downstairs was neat, and the other areas were all piled with stuff. But when she passed away, he didn't use the living room for anything other than, just piling stuff in. A bit of a hoarder in that sense.
Even though he's wealthy, John hates to throw anything out.
He would wear holey shirts and holey pants and literally shoes they'd be falling apart. John had a lot of interesting things, like just piles and piles. There'd be a box with a hole in it, and I'd be like, well, let's get rid of this one. He would just never let me get rid of it. John had a wallet, and his money would fall through it He had a brand new one sitting at home in his drawer. I was like, John, get your new wallet. You know, like you have this old wallet that's falling apart, get your new wallet. And he would just, this one's fine for now. He's just the way he is. I would definitely say he was a hoarder more than just a collector. I mean, because it was garbage to me, treasure to him, but still, in my opinion, I would call it a hoarder. He's just a frugal guy. He doesn't like to spend a lot of money.
His collections, his hoard, have now become his only company. No one really knows why he has so much stuff or what he intends to do with it. John often goes long stretches without seeing people and rarely lets anyone into his home.
John would make sure that if he was going to let you in his house, that he would know you. You would definitely have to know him, and he would have to have a relationship with you somehow. John, was very protective and also paranoid, I guess you could say. He had locks on his doors. I know he had guns. I know he was a protective person.
But he makes one exception.
God, that must be worth $500,000 right there.
In 1997, John learns that his old college friend Al Haney, who lives in the neighboring town of Berlin, is struggling to find work.
Get a job for sure.
John hasn't seen Al for over 20 years since his deployment to Vietnam and is excited to be reacquainted with an old friend, a rare thing for him.
How you doing, buddy?
He invites Al and his wife Lynn, who he has never met, into his life and home.
You must be Lynn.
I am.
Hi.
Nice
John.
to meet you.
Good to meet you. Take your coats off.
Al had gone to school with John, and he had lost contact with him for quite a while.
So this is the living
He
room
knew
over
of a
here.
lot of people and had interactions with a lot of people. But Al was the only person I knew of that went back to his school days.
Come on down.
Sure is big.
Al lost his job at one of the radio stations, and he just needed some work, and John knew him and wanted to try and help out.
Al has come back from the Vietnam War, a changed man.
John had commented a number of times that Al went to Vietnam, and when he came back, he was a much quieter and withdrawn person than he was when he was in school with them.
I know that he was a true bona fide war hero in Vietnam. He won a bronze or a gold star, I'm not sure which, but, and that too forever changed him. Suffered PTSD in a significant way. How it changed him is that he became emotionally unavailable, I guess. The best way I can describe it is he became a shell of who he was before he went. He was a very unemotional, after the war, a very unemotional person. Just very quiet, introspective, very, very intelligent. Very intelligent man, very well read, very well educated, but uncomfortable in social settings.
How good are you going?
I think John and Al were, to coin a phrase, cut from the same cloth. I think they were both reclusive in their own ways, lacked social graces with people they didn't know.
And I don't know, tiptoed around and never really made too much of a commotion after he went to war. He was just not the same person anymore that he used to be.
These radios here are collector's items, you know?
Inside the house, Al and Lynn are surprised by the sheer amount of stuff John has.
He had old radios, antique radios and things like that, and they would be on a pile of 12 other things.
He had tons of electronics, old stuff, new stuff. I mean, I don't even know what any of it was. Just electronics laying all over the kitchen table, all over the living room.
Sorry.
Be careful with that stuff.
Sorry.
John is pleased to be able to help out an old friend.
Thinking about, look, we got a position that's opened up. You know, with this new expansion coming on, we're going to need somebody with your capabilities in logistics. You're good at
John
this.
actually had a big heart when it came to people he knew. He would constantly act like the bulldog and, bark and make all these comments. But the reality was, if he knew you and you needed a hand, he would give you a hand. And I think the same was with Al. He just perceived him as needing a hand.
Monday morning?
While John has been focused on his work, Al's #1 priority is keeping his wife happy.
They were happily married, had a nice home. Al had a good job. He allowed Lynn to do whatever she wanted. She didn't work even though she had gone to college to become a registered nurse.
After returning from Vietnam, Al meets Lynn in 1978, saving her from her dysfunctional family.
She wanted out of her house. She had a lot of step siblings. There was a lot of drama. And Al set her up in an apartment. She lived on her own up until about a year and a half before they got married. And then they lived together. And in fact, they got married in the backyard of their home.
For Lynn, comedy was an escape from a troubled childhood.
She always wanted to be a comedian, and she enjoyed making people laugh. She always wanted to be noticed. So whatever it would take for her to be noticed, she would pretty much do. After she was done going to UW-Milwaukee for nursing, she went to clown school. And she would go to people's homes that were having like parties for their kids or whatever. She would have the little gimmicks with the flower that squirted water, and she would make her balloon animals and hand them to kids, and she just would naturally be the life of the party.
Unlike his extrovert wife, Al is often nervous and cagey.
Hello? Anybody here?
Al. Get over here. I need an extra pair of hands here.
When Al takes the job with John, the two work together in harmony for years.
Hold this. Make sure these two wires don't touch. Sure.
As time goes by, John gets richer and richer, his house more and more crowded, and his piles of things grow ever higher. The same can't be said for Al. In 2005, despite his job at Airpage Corps, Al can barely keep up with his wife's spending habits.
Lynn spent money since she was a teenager, like it defined who she was. The word she has always used to describe things of luxury in her life is deluxe. And the more luxurious they were, the more deluxe they were. She won the lottery twice and went through that money like it was water, from what I understand. She continued to spend as though her husband's income was limitless. If you were in a restaurant ordering a margarita, she would order a margarita with a very specific high-end tequila that most would consider a waste putting it into a margarita.
John told me that Lynn was an aggressive spender and, you know, that they had won the lottery a couple times and she had spent it. So he didn't like her very much because of stuff that he had seen her do.
Look, I may be able to find something for her to do here.
Despite this, John agrees to give Lynn a job when Al asks him to.
I won't forget this. Thank you. All right, Al. Thank you.
It's a decision John will come to regret.
He told me that she kept messing up, like she was constantly just messing up and messing up.
When she left there, she was very unhappy about it.
John Egerter has reunited with his old friend, Vietnam War vet Al Haney. He decides not only to help out his friend, but his wife as well. He's not sure it's a good idea.
It surprises me that John would hire Lynn equally as much as it surprises me that Lynn would work for John, because they didn't seem to have any friendship there or any connection. So that does surprise me.
John had agreed to hire her to help Al out, and as I trained her, I could tell that her point of view on many things was the polar opposite of John's, and I really didn't think she would last very long.
John and Lynn do not hit it off.
How's it going?
John always evaluated everybody, you know.
From last month. How you doing?
Hey, great.
Coupons? You clipping coupons? You're rich.
He thought Lynn was very liberal and irresponsible. He didn't think a lot of Lynn. Keep a friendly dialogue with her because he wanted to talk to Al, and he liked Al. They were just very different. And Lynn was, could be a bit of a hothead, so that when she got her feathers ruffled, she would tend to blow up more.
Woohoo! Yes, I saw them. Yes, I saw those.
It wasn't a good working relationship. Her opinions of things were the polar opposite of John's, and if you work for John, he will definitely involve you in conversations of anything. And so whatever your opinions are going to come to the top.
Excuse me.
Hang on.
Can I get that invoice on my desk right now?
Here. Yeah.
He got rid of her right away. He told me that she kept messing up, like she was constantly just messing up and messing up.
Don't worry.
When she left there, it was not good. She was very unhappy about it.
John worries that Al might be resentful towards him for firing Lynn. He invites them over, hoping to make amends.
John, do you have anybody else over like this for dinner?
Nope. Cheers.
Cheers.
I kind of like it here, all by myself. All my things.
John would make an effort to be friendly and, try and keep a positive spin on things. He went out of his way many times to try and make nice comments or do nice things that would improve his relationship with Lynn so that she would not try and poison the relationship between him and Al.
I'm telling you, Al, that was the best party I've ever been to.
With no stable job, Lynn falls back into some old habits.
And you know what?
She was drinking daily, and smoking pot daily. So I don't know if she was still taking care of the home and cooking meals and doing things you would think a wife would do, especially one that didn't work. And yet, Al loved Lynn
Like a daughter or something like
to
that?
the ends of the earth, just adored her.
And it doesn't stop there.
She started having boyfriends.
Drink it up.
I know that Al knew of Tommy within a matter of weeks of their involvement.
Do it.
Lynn's new boyfriend, Tommy Duyette, is an auto parts delivery man she met in a local bar.
Come on.
Tommy was just a good-natured guy who had misguided love or obsession with Lynn. She'd always referred to him as her protector, so he took on that role. So she would refer to the men that she dated as her out-of-the-house husband, and Al was her at-home husband.
If I had a girlfriend, I don't think my wife would be too okay with that, as I wouldn't be okay if she had a boyfriend, So I always thought that was just a strange setup.
The balance is several $1,000s, man.
Strange bedfellows aside, Al has other things on his mind. In 2010, the recession hits them hard, and they're at risk of losing their house. Even though Al explains that his boss has nothing to do with their financial woes, Lynn is convinced that John owes Al money.
If you just went to John.
John paid net 30, which is 30 days after the invoice. So Lynn and Al were having a cash flow problem. And this was eating at Lynn like nothing I've ever witnessed from someone about money. She would be on Al about this money. It was constant. Al, have you talked to John? Al, when are we gonna get the money from John? Al, how are we gonna make the house payment? Al, I've gotta have gas money. Al, I've gotta have cigarettes. It was almost a constant beratement of Al over actions of John that Al has no control over.
What are you gonna do? You're gonna hit the 2? You should hit the 4.
With Al and Lynn's relationship spinning out of control, Lynn takes on yet another lover. Her ex-boyfriend, civilian police clerk Mark Finken.
You got it.
I don't know how many boyfriends Al was aware, but it was no secret that she would go out and party.
He wouldn't confront it. I mean, he was not assertive. He was negative assertive. You know, he just, whatever went on, he just, okay, and just plodded along. I assume he was okay with her having a boyfriend. You would have to be if it was going on that long.
Lynn even invites her boyfriends over to the house while Al is home. But he has no idea what they're really up to.
There's a new character in our story. Might have to change the plot a little bit, but...
We don't need a new character. As long as the main character gets her notary license, we're in business.
We can talk about this a little later.
Lynn has all the men in her life wrapped around her finger, except for one, John, and their relationship is about to take a strange turn.
She calls and says, would John commit suicide? But I just knew something was wrong.
Lynn Haney has a growing entourage of men at her beck and call, but she's been less successful in winning over her husband's boss, John Agerter. In the spring of 2011, John receives an unexpected visitor.
Lynn.
I got you some coupons. I got you.
She brings coupons as a peace offering.
I like those so much.
John told me that things were improving with Lynn, that she had actually dropped off some coupons to him for pizzas or some such thing, which John always loved to bargain, and a coupon for a free whatever was a big deal with him. And that he felt that, gee, she was maybe coming around, that she had actually, you know, gone out of her way to help John out.
So, I hear you're thinking of moving to Las Vegas.
She also asks John about his future.
He did talk about buying a house sooner or later. He hates tax. So he was gonna move to Nevada where there's no tax.
Hey, everybody! Gather round! Guess what I brought?
Over the next few months, Lynn drops by John's office with fresh baked goods for his employees.
Oatmeal raisin.
Her cookies, however, come with a series of unusual questions.
She came in with some cookies for us, and we're like, okay, this is strange.
She started talking to us like she was kind of an old friend.
She was asking, does John even sleep? And I was like, well, as far as I know, he doesn't sleep very much. But I was like, he told me he only needs like 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night. I just thought I was just talking about John, because John's an interesting character.
Lynn also, for the first time, extends an invitation to Joe.
She had invited me to go to their house. I don't even know these people. They have an in-ground pool. They're gonna have a little party get together. And she stayed for probably 45 minutes to an hour and then just left.
The visit is followed by a bizarre phone call several days later.
she calls and says, hey, what's going on with John? And then she was like, well, he owes Al money. And I said, well, there's nothing I can do about that. I don't know. But then she also asked me, she's like, well, can I ask you a question? And I was like, well, sure. She's like, would John commit suicide? And I said, well, John would never commit suicide. I said, he's a Christian. He would never commit suicide. I was like, he believes that would put him in hell. He would never commit suicide. And she was like, oh, well, just call John for me and see what's going on. And that was literally the end of the conversation.
But party plans are soon put on hold. On June 21st, 2011, a powerful storm hits Milwaukee. John Agerter is, as usual, alone at home in his big cluttered house. He's watching the weather. He's right to worry. That night, one of his communications towers loses power.
We had a lot of thunder and lightning storms that night. A lot of heavy rain. I lost power in my own house, which is very unusual because we have underground wiring. So it was a big stormy night.
Hey, Rob. Yes, John. Listen, we just lost Menomonee Falls. Yeah, the transmission tower's down. Yeah, we gotta be there tomorrow morning at 6. Yeah, you get a crew together? Okay, I'll pick up the truck and... listen, there's something going on in the garage. I gotta go. I'll see you tomorrow morning.
But he won't make it till tomorrow. There's another kind of storm brewing, and John Agerter is directly in its path.
It just kind of takes the breath out of you.
He had a cord wrapped around his neck, and they put plastic shopping bags over his head.
On June 21st, 2011, a mighty storm hits Milwaukee, bringing with it unimaginable chaos.
It was definitely a pretty big storm. I woke up the next morning and stretched and went to work. Usually John would always call me right when I basically got into the office, right around 9 o'clock.
Hey, John. Oh, hey, Robert. What do you mean you didn't show?
One of Jeremy's colleagues calls in looking for John.
Robert was calling because John was supposed to be at one of the towers and he had not shown up. So he was concerned because he hadn't heard anything from him, and John was never ever late or missed any sort of business, anything. So it was strange.
Hey, John, it's Jeremy. Just wondering where you are.
So I tried calling him immediately and didn't get a response for a minute or whatever, 2 that I waited for, and decided to go check it out. And so I drove over to John's house. I was walking around the house trying to see if I could see anything, get any sort of response from anything inside, and I couldn't. No one came to the door, nothing inside, no movement or anything. So I called the cops and waited at the house.
Police arrive and start searching for a way into the house.
So we went to the side window, the basement window.
At that point, it was determined, since Jeremy had a slight frame, he was the smallest, he would be able to fit through a basement window.
So I went inside and fell right away because I'd never been inside there, and the basement is just full of boxes and stuff, just like the office, just stuff strewn everywhere. And just complete darkness. tried to open the front door and noticed that the front door has no lock from the inside. You can only unlock it with a key on the inside as well as the outside. And I was trying to open the door, realized I couldn't.
Jeremy begins to panic when he realizes that he's locked in the house.
It's getting a little creepier now because you realize you're locked in from the inside. It's a creepy feeling. Like things start to close in on you a little more and you start to think about different ways to get out and what could be happening. And so I just went to the garage and jumped over some blankets, like right near the entrance.
Jeremy finally opens the garage door.
And they told me to wait in the house. So I was feeling a little better, like maybe it's all right, maybe something's okay, like maybe he's just not here. And then, like a few seconds after that, I heard his beeper going off, and his beeper was never far from him.
There were plastic bags over his head. He pulled the bag off, saw there was a large amount of blood.
They took me out to the driveway, and I sat and I prayed. It like just kind of takes the breath out of you, and like just everything kind of stops for a second.
I could have seen John falling off a tower or doing something like that. I mean, he was getting up there in age, and he still climbed and stuff like that. I can't imagine that he ended this way. He did a lot of dangerous stuff in his work that could have done something, but I never imagined something like this.
And soon, an unexpected confession will expose a shocking conspiracy behind the murder.
He was devastated. He couldn't believe it was true.
We were very surprised. Now, I really questioned as to how deep this went and actually where this case was going.
Milwaukee businessman John Egerter is found strangled by an extension cord in his own garage. There are no signs of forced entry.
John was extremely cautious about who he would let in the house. If he didn't know you were coming, he probably wouldn't answer the door.
While we were processing the scene, I received a phone call from a New Berlin Police Department sergeant that's a neighboring agency of ours. And he asked me, he said, "Are you guys at a death scene?" And I said, "Yes, we are." And he said, "Does it appear suspicious?" I says, "Yes, it does." He said, "Do you think it could be a homicide?" I said, "Yes, I do." At that point, he said, "Is the victim's name John?" I said, "Yes, it is." And he said, "Oh, call Slinger Police Department. I believe they have your suspects in custody."
Thanks, guys.
Earlier that same day, Brenda Eddy also gets a surprise phone call.
Yeah, Brenda?
It's her cousin, Lynn.
She said to me, "I'm in a lot of trouble. I killed someone." And my reaction was not one of, "Oh my gosh." My reaction was one of, "Yeah, right." So I didn't believe it. And I thought she was just in some trouble. Maybe the cops were looking for her for a bar fight. She called me a second time. She told me she had to get gas, and then she was coming up to my place. I kind of went, could this be real? Could she really have killed someone? So I called my husband frantically And he said, I want you to call the Waukesha County Sheriff's Department and see if there's been a murder.
Yeah, do something,
I'm out in my garage with the phone, and Lynn and Tommy show up, so I thought it best that I just get off the phone. I didn't want them to suspect that that's who I was talking to. I had never seen Tommy before. I'd only heard about him, but he's a really big guy. I was intimidated by his size.
Brenda is on edge, unsure whether she is in danger and what to do next with the two fugitives who are now in her home.
Brenda, do you have any plastic bags?
I started to feel afraid and panicked. She was getting plastic bags out of a closet in my kitchen to put some groceries and things in.
Put all of it in there.
They were going to go on the run and live in the woods.
Hello, honey. Yeah.
Brenda's husband tells her that the police are about to raid the house.
There were officers in many locations, even on my patio. They were everywhere. And they were prepared to arrest them.
Get down on your knees! Get down on your knees!
They told Tommy to get down on the floor. They kind of slammed him into my table. And Lynn is standing there, and they're telling her to get down. And she starts telling them, I can't because I have PTSD. In all the years I've known Lynn, never has she ever talked to me about her having PTSD. It was a quick thought to save herself from getting manhandled on the floor, and that's how she acted. You know, I have PTSD, I have PTSD.
Police arrest Lynn Haney and Tommy Duyette for the murder of John Agerter. Al is in shock when he finds out his wife has been charged with the crime.
He was devastated. He couldn't believe it was true. And because John and he were such good friends, his initial reaction was, I'm done with her.
Lynn's boyfriend and partner in crime, Tommy, learns that Lynn, while in custody, is trying to pin John's death on him only. Tommy decides to tell the police the truth, and it turns out to be much more than they bargained for. Tommy tells them that Lynn is the mastermind behind the crime. He claims that he no longer wanted to take part in her plan when she manipulated him into committing the murder. And it wasn't supposed to happen that night.
We're gonna get the money John owes Al. Tonight. Tonight. Go there! Stay there! Stay there!
What are you doing? Everything okay?
Yeah.
Where's Al?
Where's the money you owe Al?
What money?
Where's the money you owe Al?
I don't know Al any
You owe
money.
him $5,000! Where is it?
Lynn!
Where is it?
Lynn!
Oh! No! Let me! Oh, no! Oh!
At one point, he grabbed an electrical cord and wrapped it around John's neck, closed his eyes, and pulled it tight until he felt no more movement from John.
Tommy! If you love me, you'll kill him.
Tommy went on to talk about as he opened his eyes, he could hear Lynn with a roll of duct tape wrapping that duct tape around John's neck to continue with the process of preventing him from breathing. He didn't remember much after that.
I'm gonna go inside to see if there's a freezer.
At least initially, they were going to stick him in a freezer so that they would have time or they could take care of it later. I believe they thought John might have a freezer in his basement or in his garage, and he did not. So that was the first part of their plan that kind of went bad.
The next morning, Tommy and Lynn drive around, desperately trying to find a freezer.
That morning, when they were looking for a freezer, Lynn checked, she called Sears to see if she had enough money on her card or if she'd have enough money to buy a freezer on her Sears card. She also had made some phone calls to her relative, Ziggy, to see if he could get them a freezer.
Lynn's impulsive nature derails the plan.
I believe that this plan went wrong because Lynn jumped the gun. She didn't follow the plan. I don't believe she was supposed to go there on that day. I think they were supposed to do the murder in the future. I think when Lynn got something in her head, there was no stopping her. That's what she was going to do, and she's going to use her pawns to carry out what she wanted.
Unable to find a freezer, Lynn and Tommy head directly to Brenda's house. They're going to get provisions to go out of town.
Hurry up!
After the arrest, the police make a startling discovery in Lynn's cell phone records. They uncover a series of phone calls between her and her old boyfriend, a civilian police clerk named Mark Finken.
At first, I think we were excited about the fact that he works for a police department. We thought we'd get some very good answers.
Just days after they begin questioning Mark Finken, he commits suicide and leaves a note declaring his innocence.
We were very surprised. Now, I really questioned as to how deep this went and actually where this case was going.
The police come across a bizarre exchange of emails between Mark and Lynn, detailing their plan as though it were a fictional story with characters. That was their code.
The deal was Lynn would write him and say, well, for my story, how about if this happened or that happened? And they were all the details of what the presumed plan was.
She had a lot of elaborate plans, one of which was to dispose of John's body by grinding it up or dissolving it in hydrogen peroxide and taking the remains and sprinkling those remains around a rose garden. She felt that by doing so, she could gradually get rid of it and nobody would know or be the wiser.
The emails detail how Mark was going to assume John's identity after he was dead, and Lynn was going to administer his estate with her new notary license.
As long as the main character gets her notary license, we're in business.
On Mark Finken's computer, we found a copy of a will with John's name on it. They were writing out a will and they were going to sign it, and I believe Lynn was going to notarize that. We also found a copy of John Agruder's signature that Mark had been practicing.
And so Mark could then be John's signature and Lynn would notarize it as being authentic. That's a pretty elaborate plan.
Lynn assumes that because John has no family, that no one will notice he's gone.
Apparently, John had been talking about moving to Nevada. They were going to murder John on the 4th of July weekend so that they would have more time to do what they needed to do with his remains because it was a holiday weekend and no one would be looking for him. The fact that she had spent so much time concocting this plan to think about how to sell off this man's company and to think that he didn't really matter because he didn't have anyone. is the most heartbreaking part.
To the police, it appears that Lynn spearheaded a complex operation.
There's one person that can tie everybody into it, and that one person is Lynn. Lynn knew Mark, Lynn knew Tommy, and Lynn knew John. None of these other players knew each other, so Lynn brought them all together. I wouldn't say she was the brains of the operation. I think Mark was probably the smartest one there, but I think Lynn is very manipulative and seemed to have control over all of these men.
Al's shock at Lynn's behavior doesn't last long.
The day of John's funeral is the day that I spoke to Al, and he was getting Lynn an attorney and getting the money to pay the retainer. And not only for her, but for Tommy as well. He was always in court supporting Lynn and continued to pay the attorney's fees. So I'm thinking he, for some reason, either didn't believe it or chose to ignore it. I think he is extremely hurt and yet is still obsessed or in love to tolerate the things that he has tolerated.
He supported his wife completely. I mean, in the sense of trying to help her with any kind of lawyers he could or anything like that. And he stood with her. I think it's very odd. Obviously, Lynn gives something to Al that he finds more important than a lot of things, integrity things that he's willing to give up or overlook for something.
Investigators can't understand the hold that Lynn had over all these men.
We still to this day have no idea why these men would do everything that she said and what power she had over them. It still kind of amazes us.
On December 15th, 2011, 6 months after the murder, Tommy Douillet makes a plea bargain and gives a 99-page statement pointing at Lynn Haney as the mastermind of the murder of John Agerter. Lynn Haney maintains her innocence but admits that there is enough evidence to convict her, so she takes the Alford plea.
It's a plea that is not acknowledging her guilt, but she is acknowledging that we have enough evidence put together that reasonable people would believe that she committed this crime. It's a way for her to not plead guilty, but take the sentence.
On October 9th, 2012, Lynn Haney and Tommy Douillet are both found guilty of the first-degree murder of John Agerter. Tommy Douillet is sentenced to 30 years with 20 years of extended supervision. Lynn Haney is sentenced to 15 years, 9 months. The Alford plea has worked in her favor.
To concoct such a plan that ended with John murdered, Mark committing suicide, Tommy sentenced to 30 years, and she, the queen of all of this madness and plotting and scheming, and she walks away with 15 years and 9 months in prison. I absolutely believe that Lynn was the mastermind behind all of this. Based on what I know about her, how I know her, and based on evidence that the police found, she was absolutely the mastermind. And I truly believe that Tommy was manipulated in this situation, completely manipulated. Tommy is the person that did murder John by his own hands. But in my opinion, Tommy was nothing more than a weapon that Lynn had at her disposal. In my opinion, he and Mark were her victims.
I think that Lynn was just really angry at John and thought he was rich and she wasn't. She had had money a number of times in her life and pretty much blew it all the time. But she wanted the money, and he had it, and she had been wronged by him, in her opinion. And, you know, I think that's where it really comes down to.
Contrary of what Lynn believed, John Egerter will be deeply missed.
I see constant reminders of him all the time. Every time I see a tower, you know, it reminds me of him. It was funny because people would consider him to be one of the strangest characters ever, and he was a different person, but he's the only person in my life who's actually really, really influenced me.
He was a good friend, difficult friend a lot of times, but a very good friend for many years. So I was shocked by the whole thing. I still am. I definitely miss him.